Hi, this is Jeff, your host for KDT TV. Here with Perry Tsikalashomeowners, who is my Allstate insurance agent, and we thought we'd have a conversation about different forms of insurance, homeowners insurance, which I'm sure you all have, and auto insurance. By way of introduction, Perry has a degree from the University of Texas at Arlington in accounting, which I think is a pretty good thing for an insurance guy to have, is some knowledge about money. And he's had numerous national awards and over 20 years of service in the industry, so I think he's pretty qualified to talk to us today about different kinds of insurance. And if you all like this, we'll revisit and talk about some other things as well. We're going to provide this in a few segments, and it'll be under the lifestyle section in KDT TV. Perry, first I want to ask you a couple of questions about homeowners insurance. And the first one I really'd like you to address is, we always hear these things about property value and whether or not your insurance is going to cover the actual value of your property. And how do you, if my house burns down or something bad happens, how do I know everything's going to be covered in there? And what do I have to know about as a consumer to make sure that things are properly inventoried and things of that nature, so that, if I have a disaster, that I'm going to be covered?
Well, thank you, Jeff. There's basically two parts to the coverage for your home. One is the building itself, which in most cases you would want that covered for the full replacement cost. And most companies have a tool where they will add up the square footage, special ornamentation, number of rooms, bathrooms, and so forth, and come up with a replacement cost that you should feel comfortable with. It's not necessarily the appraised value, because in some of our areas around Johnstown, the land value has dropped quite a bit and the price of the homes have dropped. But if you have a partial loss, for instance, a kitchen fire that burns out your whole entire kitchen, and you're trying to replace, well, you may not get the value that you need. So you want to make sure that you're up to date on what the cost to replace the home would be. And with that, you can ask your agent, as far as your personal belongings, in other words, Jeff, everything that would fall out of your house if you picked it up and shook it, okay? Computers, clothes, right, furniture, all that. Very important that you have replacement cost on that, because quite simply, if you have electrical strike, like lightning, blows out a few TVs and computers, you want to make sure that you're going to get the value to replace it, and you want to make sure that that's up to date as far as having enough coverage. Also, most companies will have a schedule of limits. Guns are limited, cash is limited, jewelry. You should look through that to make sure that you're adequately covered. If you have special collector items, special rugs, things like that, that you want to make sure you get the full appraised value.
Now, Perry, should obviously our audience is they're small entrepreneurs, mostly healthcare professionals, and they have homes and things like that. Is it important to inventory all your stuff, and how do you go about doing that? I mean, it seems pretty cumbersome to walk around your house and try to make a list of all your stuff, because, gosh, I know after 35 years of accumulating stuff, I'm doing everything I can to get rid of it now. But how do you go about actually providing an inventory for your insurance agent?
That's a very good question. It's not a bad idea to provide an inventory, Jeff. And if you do, keep that off-site if you can, or in a fireproof box or file or safe. That lets the insurance company know all the items that you have, and more valuable items if you keep that sales receipt, maybe safety deposit box. It is amazing, though, when there is a total loss or a large loss like a fire, the representatives from the insurance company do an unbelievable job categorizing what all is in there. They can actually find out how many blenders you had, what kind of silverware. So they do an excellent job with most companies determining what you have, but it's not a bad idea. Some people videotape it and then keep that off-site or keep it in their phone. But it helps to make sure you get full replacement of all your items and that nothing's missed.
Cool. Perry, I travel a lot for my business, and I think most of my if you will, watchers of KDT TV. They're also in the habit of traveling a lot. They go to seminars. They do things like that. If I'm away from home and somebody steals my watch, or I get mugged and they, steal jewelry, things like that, does my homeowner's coverage actually provide for any of that type of loss if I'm away from the home?
Yes, very good question. Yeah, those personal items are covered away from home, up to 10% of the coverage that you have for personal property. So, Jeff, if you've got 150,000 of personal property coverage on your policy, then you would have 15,000 off-site. Now, quite often, let's take the example of a watch. It may not meet your deductible because a lot of folks have 500 or 1,000 deductible now is quite common. But there is coverage for those items off-site.
Okay. Thank you. I think another thing that's pertinent is, and we're all getting a little older, and we all have kids that are getting a little older. And for those folks out there whose children aren't so old, but they're thinking about that someday, what happens to them when they go to college? What if their laptop's stolen or some of the personal property you've provided those children to be able to, get educated and all that sort of thing? Is there any coverage that applies for my homeowner's policy to perhaps my daughter who's finishing college?
Most companies do provide that coverage. You should ask, and they may ask you, Jeff, to list that child on the policy to make sure that that's covered. We've had a few laptops stolen. We've had a few laptops dropped, broken, and so forth. When they're in a dormitory, for most carriers, that is extended to the dormitory. Now, when you get the children that are juniors, seniors in college, it's quite common that they'll get an apartment. When an apartment living is what's happening at the university, then they should purchase a renter's policy. And it's not a bad idea for each individual student to have their own renter's policy. That also helps with liability if someone else trips and falls on the property and you have to defend a lawsuit. So I hope that helps.
It does, and it sort of brings up another question. I was watching the news like you were this morning, and I saw a Harvard study that says that up to 36% of Americans are now renting, and that can be for a variety of reasons. They were talking a little bit about people that have had homes that have been foreclosed and they just can't buy anymore, and they're forced into a situation of renting. Are there special considerations for people who are renting a property or even leasing a building to practice in or things like that? What are some of the things they should really be worried about in terms of making sure they're protected against loss?
There's basically two coverages that a renter should highly consider and ask their insurance agent about. One of them is their personal property, Jeff, to make sure, just as on the homeowners, that they have enough to cover their personal property, their belongings, and to make sure that's replacement cost. Replacement cost means you're going to get replaced new items for old, not yard sale price. So if your bedroom furniture is destroyed and you paid $10,000 for it maybe 8-9 years ago, that you're not going to get $1,000. You're going to get replacement cost to make you whole again. The other very important cost that sometimes slips by, especially with people that are renting because they don't own the property, is liability coverage. If someone gets injured on the property, okay, it could be that the banana peel was placed by you on the steps or forgotten or dropped, what have you,
Right.
Okay? Or another thing that we've found is quite often landlords are not hesitant at all to sue for negligence if the tenant leaves, let's say, leaves a pot boiling on the stove and that causes a fire. They will usually put it through their carrier to pay for their loss, but then it's quite common that they will subrogate against the tenant for their negligence. And then a third coverage that's usually on as a rider that's kind of minor but loss of use. Now, certainly for a medical professional, their practice, this would be very, very important if they're renting. Let's say that you're renting and you have apartments upstairs, and that person, no fault of your own, their pipes burst, and water comes down and gets your office all wet, ruins a couple examining tables and so forth. You can't practice or limited practice. Loss of use can help to make you whole again for the income that you're losing while they're making repairs, smoke damage, water damage, what have you.
Boy, that all makes really a lot of sense, and I think very few of us ever really dig into this stuff very deeply. We just go and buy whatever we think we have to have and don't really spend, I think, enough time thinking about these things. Perry, that's going to conclude the end of this segment. For those of you out there that want more information, you can always contact us at kdt.tv on the info button. And I want to thank Perry tsikalashomeowners for being with us today and talking about homeowners insurance. For Jeff, this is KDT TV.